I knew that it was a deadly disease. And right off the bat, my response was, I'm just going to go ahead and live my life the way I want to live my life. Some of that experience comes from the worldview of having been in India and been in ashrams and been kicked off ashrams and trying to learn about the meaning of life. And the very first lesson that I had in an ashram was that simplicity is bliss and expectations will bring disappointment. And I really realized in the moment when they said colon cancer that I was going to simplify things. I wasn't going to make a long, drawn-out ordeal out of this. I was going to walk out of the hospital and dive right into my full-blown lifestyle, but I was going to amplify that sex, drugs, rock and roll era was what I was going to do. That was going to be my treatment.
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. Today's guest is my friend and colleague, Rick Kahn, an outstanding executive coach for companies whose products and services we all use every day. His road from dyslexic middle child, high school dropout, globetrotting spiritual seeker, and high-end custom home builder to the life he lives today based out of a quaint seaside town in Mexico is fascinating at face value. But add to that storyline 2 mind-blowing encounters with mortality separated by 30 years, and you've got a tale that's packed full of extraordinary lessons and wisdom for all of us. In this episode, Rick shows us how life is a series of necessary deaths that lead to fuller life before we depart planet Earth, and he reveals the sneaky downside of hope. As an executive coach, Rick specializes in leadership and communication development for executive-level professionals. His clients include Facebook, eBay, Cisco, the Stanford Research Institute, Wire, and other Silicon Valley technology companies. As a strategic partner with FMI, the nation's premier full-service consulting firm to the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, Rick provides best-of-class leadership development training to executives and teams. As I listened to the rough cut of this episode in preparation for final editing, I realized that I wasn't just performing a necessary step in the episode production process. I was literally growing as a person. I had a blast with this conversation, and I think you'll get a ton out of it too. I am here today with my good friend and colleague, Rick Rahn. He and I have worked together pretty consistently for the past 4 years in a leadership development context, serving the construction industry. And Rick is a construction veteran, custom home builder of the highest quality. I don't know if you get annoyed or not, Rick, but I just love asking you questions all the time because you've had such an interesting life and been in so many different places and worn so many different kinds of hats. And I'm really glad to have him here today. And without any further ado, Rick, we're going to jump into your story. And I would love for you to start with what happened when you were 24. Where were you and what happened?
Sure. And let me just jump back a little bit, that the work we do together is so much centered around our experiences in life and how it shapes our beliefs. And I think that's a great place to, make sure that I know that I come from, is that as we talk about at dying and death, it's all about our relationship and what creates our view on dying and death. And it's our experiences. And it's what you and I call worldview in the work we do. And I think most of your listeners relate to what worldview is. So yeah, at 24, I had a worldview shaping experience with death. I'd been in India. I went to India when I was 18 years of age. So I was a high school dropout. Didn't really figure out for a long time what it was I was supposed to be doing, but I knew there was a better version of me somewhere. And so instead of looking inside, I kind of went chasing after that better version and ended up in India and had some wonderful and interesting experiences. I came back several years later and ended up in San Francisco, and I was in the bar and entertainment business, working in nightclubs and working construction by the day, and at nighttime I was a bartender working in the music industry in San Francisco. somewhere along the line there, amidst all my partying, because it was in the 70s, in the mid 70s. So I was definitely playing pretty hard at life, having a ton of fun, as young people want to do. And I definitely was doing that. I started to pass some blood in my stool and figured that probably wasn't a good thing. And eventually got myself over to the hospital in San Francisco. I think it was San Francisco. It's in the Haight. I can't remember the name. It's interesting I don't. But at any rate, I end up at the hospital. They run a series of tests. They keep going deeper with tests, which can start to scare anybody when they start to scratch their heads and ask you questions that you're not sure why they're asking these questions. Fortunately, I had a great nurse who was really there the whole time. She was beautiful. I flirted with her. Pretty much all I thought about was, whether I was going to get a date with her out of this whole thing. And she, I remember, just was really patient, and that scared me as well a little bit, to realize how concerned she was. Long story short, I get diagnosed with colon cancer.
I was curious. You said, the doctors began to kind of scratch their heads and they wanted to look into a little bit more, and you realized, this isn't just, simple in and out kind of deal. Do you remember how you were feeling when you realized that it wasn't going just to be an open and shut, here's your pill or here's your this kind of situation? Do you remember how you were experiencing that?
Well, for me, it was a little surreal. I mean, if I go back a number of years, I had been sick in India, and I remember going into a hospital, and the very first thing they did was shoot me up with morphine. And I thought to myself, now that's an interesting remedy to whatever it was a stomach ailment, probably in India it would be that. And so my trust of hospitals was fairly low. I didn't quite understand the medical profession. So fast forward to the experience in San Francisco, I felt like I was on a little bit of a ride that I couldn't control. And they were looking for something that they weren't sure what they were looking for. So when they did give me the diagnosis, it was over a period of probably a week or 2 weeks of all types of tests that I won't go into to describe, but invasive tests.
Right. Yeah, we can imagine. We can fill in the blanks there.
Yeah, you can there. I don't need to go there. And I kept my sense of humor about it all as well, because I was asked questions that were extremely personal that I wasn't expecting to have to answer. So the whole thing was just a little bit deeper than I'd thought. I just thought I didn't know what I had. I just knew I was passing blood, and you probably shouldn't pass blood. So when they use the words cancer and colon cancer, for me, the alarm was there because my grandfather died of colon cancer. And he was a young man when he died of colon cancer. And I was a little kid. I knew that it was a deadly disease. And right off the bat, my response was, I'm just going to go ahead and live my life the way I want to live my life. Some of that experience comes from the worldview of having been in India and been in ashrams and been kicked off ashrams and trying to learn about the meaning of life. And the very first lesson that I had in an ashram was that simplicity is bliss and expectations will bring disappointment. And I really realized in the moment when they said colon cancer that I was going to simplify things. I wasn't going to make a long, drawn-out ordeal out of this. I was going to walk out of the hospital and dive right into my full-blown lifestyle, but I was going to amplify that sex, drugs, rock and roll era was what I was going to do. That was going to be my treatment. They wanted me to step into chemotherapy and the things that as a 24-year-old, for me, this 24-year-old, were not going to happen. I wasn't consulting with my family. I didn't have a significant other that was fawning over me. This was all my own personal information. I shared with nobody, actually. So the only person that knew were the doctor.
Not even your immediate family, you said?
No, nobody had no family in San Francisco. I was living on my own and living my full, youthful, explorative life. I never told my family.
Where were your folks at this point?
My parents would have been in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's interesting that I didn't tell my family, actually.
And the time in India was really formative in terms of how you decided to respond to this experience, especially some of those ideas. I don't remember exactly what your language was, but you said that having expectations lead to what? Can you say that again? What was that statement?
Expectations lead to disappointment.
And so the idea there then is what? Simply to purge yourself of expectations of yourself and of life so that then you're not disappointed? What's the mindset there?
Well, the concept behind that is if you have expectations, if you set expectations for yourself and you don't achieve them, you will just simply be disappointed. Whereas if you simply stay present and move forward with your experiences and you just simply live and in the moment, then there's really no setup for the disappointment. If you expect to make the basketball team as part of the starting five and you don't, you're disappointed. If you expect to get an A on the exam and you get a B or a B plus, you're disappointed. If you simply take the expectation out and just say, I'm just going to do my best. I'm just going to live my best. I'm going to try my hardest. And so for me, I think that's a good question, Andrew. I think where that ties in is that I just was going to live my life and not hold on to the expectation of, oh, this is going to get fixed. This is going to get better. I just really was, I'm not even going to dive into this one. I'm going to simply live my life. And if this is the bell that's ringing, my ticket's being punched, I was going to have some fun on the way out.
And within that framework of reducing expectations or eliminating expectations from your life, is it still, within that framework, does it still pass muster to want things, to pursue things, or is the idea that you don't necessarily pursue certain results, but you just continue to do your very best to be present here and now?
Well, I think it ties into a conversation you and I've had before about hope and fear, expectation, disappointment, hope and fear. And for me, hope is another one of those. It's a wonderful thing to have hope. But it also conjures up the amount of fear that if your dreams don't come true, what if I'm hoping so much, and I can give examples. I hope we get a new president, and I can hang on to that so much that if we don't get a new president, I'm going to be really disappointed. And I can also be very fearful that this president might get reelected. And so my hope for a new one can create fear. So I tend not to hang my hat on too much hope either. And they go hand in hand, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that. So expectation, disappointment, hope, fear, I think that they contrast each other a lot, and they can be a little slippery to get too hung up on living up to expectations. Oh gosh, my father expects me to be this. You're a father, I'm a father. You might have expectations for your kids, and if they don't meet that, how do they feel? And sometimes it's helpful, and other times I've found it can cause some damage as well.
And I've known you or long enough to know that you have accomplished plenty in the world that's measurable by the normal metrics that humans measure productivity and things, and accomplished quite a bit in terms of quality of relationships and things like that. So I know that you're someone who has been, quote, doing stuff in the world for your whole life in ways that are meaningful. And so clearly the way you've embraced this mindset around expectations doesn't mean you don't do anything. It just means you have a very different frame of mind in the midst of all of those things. And I would really like to get into that a little bit more, because I think your life bears out how that philosophy's played out for you. But there's more to this first chapter of your story. There's two chapters of your story. First, we're in the 24-year-old chapter. It's just so fascinating to me, especially with the struggles I have with anxiety, that you decided to double down on sex, drugs, and rock and roll, eat, drink, and be merry, as opposed to doing any of the recommended courses of treatment or any of that kind of thing. So pick up where you left off. You've gotten this colon cancer diagnosis. You had I believe you said a grandfather or an uncle who had passed at an early age. So you'd seen what it could do. And it sounds like in pretty short order, you went, okay, well, that's a bummer, and I'm just going to blow it out. So pick up the story from there and move it forward for us.
Sure. And I'll pause just for a second on that, because what came to me about expectations and that, or it's really about goals as well. And so I have lived a life that's been full of goals, and setting a goal is a marker out there that you have to work towards. And along that journey, there's so many different diversions that you can set a goal, and you're just a target out there you're going for. But if you have this expectation of when I reach that goal, I will be, you will be disappointed because it's generally not what you thought it would be. So just a clarification on expectations. And what came to me while you were speaking was it's about goals. And it was the same thing with the response I think I had at 24, which never really put it in this framework. But my goal was to live my life rather than expect a cure. My goal was just to live my life. And I was a really happy 24-year-old. I mean, I had pretty girlfriends. I was working in the music industry. I was seeing great music all the time. I was known as a Van fan back then. Van Morrison was one of the regular performers at the Great American Music Hall, where I had the good pleasure to be one of the people that worked there occasionally. And so I saw a lot of great music and pretty women and great liquor and good drugs. And it seemed like that was pretty much enough. Great friends. I played softball. My life was complete. The last thing I felt like doing was shifting that into a hospital room with a drip of chemicals. That made no sense to a young guy. I figured my goal, have a good time. So as you said, I doubled down. And in doubling down, I went hard. I went really hard at it. And then must have been a week, 2 weeks later. I don't know. I lost track of time because I was in pretty good haze. I got a knock on my door. I lived in the Mission District in San Francisco. And it was in the morning, I remember. And I opened the door. I think I had a couple of friends there. And of course, we were in full party mode. And it was the nurse that I had this crush on. She said they'd been trying to reach me. Now, these were back in the days of an answering machine. So I wasn't picking up anything there. I'm sure it was full. And she said, I've been leaving you messages. There's been a mistake. You've been misdiagnosed. And I said, wow. And I'm sure I offered her a line or a drink or whatever it was we were doing at the time. She was lovely and seemed to have dragged me back to the hospital, and where they told me that I had a hookworm, which is a parasite that I picked up in India, that had attached itself to my intestinal wall and could lie dormant for years. And in the colonoscopies and the exams they did, it resembled lesions on my colon wall, which they thought were cancer. And the blood was the protein regurgitation. Your viewers must love this.
Oh yeah, this is good stuff.
It was the protein regurgitation from these parasites. So they'd eat my proteins and then they'd regurgitate up blood, and it would pass in my stool. So it was a perfect mimic of colon cancer. I just got lucky that I didn't go in for serious chemo treatment when it would have done nothing for the condition I had. They ended up treating me. It was some B movie. It was, they treated me for my stomach gurgled and swole and whatever it was, but they killed the parasite. They killed the parasite before I could kill myself.
My goodness. And so in the space of a week, had it been someone else who hadn't chosen the path that you did for that week, it seems like it could have been a really mind-blowing experience, going from maybe that week not going the route you'd gone, but instead, oh my gosh, I'm dying. I've got to start my treatments. I'm going to beat this thing. All that you imagine someone might get into gear around. You hadn't had that experience. You had basically said, okay, thanks for the diagnosis. I'm going to go and continue to live this wonderful life that I've created for myself as a 24-year-old. So what was that misdiagnosis news like to you? What, if anything, changed for you?
I think, again, it was for me, as I'm an instinctual person. I think I always have been. I've always operated on some internal compass of my own. You don't get a lot of people who drop out of high school who don't have some kind of determination on why it's important no longer to attend school, and you can convince your parents that that's the right decision. So There's something that maybe the internal wiring, the misdiagnosis for me, I think just confirmed that I knew what was best for me. And I think because of my experiences at a young age in India, that I already had witnessed death on the streets, beggars, dismemberment, leprosy, things that a kid from Albuquerque, New Mexico, is just a Jewish kid at that. It's so foreign that at 18, before I was even 19 years of age, I'd seen a very dark side of humanity, of suffering, and seen death, and amongst other many beautiful things. And I think that it really showed me that life was temporary, which was other teachings that I had had, and that this is all impermanence. And whether that choice of the misdiagnosis, to me, that was as temporary as the diagnosis. In that moment, I'm relieved now. In the previous moment, I made a choice to just set a goal to live fast, hard, and fun. And being misdiagnosed, I had to sober up. I realized, oh shit, I'm going to live for a while. I can't keep this pace.
Yeah, right, right. So then, was there almost a little bit of like being bummed out that you couldn't just be full tilt and stay healthy? I mean, were you a little bit bummed, or was it a little bit of?
That's a great question, Andrew. I think I was relieved, if I really look back, is that I think I was relieved because I knew I had the capacity to party hard. And I also had the common sense and solid upbringing. I come from a great family, and I had a good solid upbringing to know that debauchery really not necessarily was in my DNA. And if I wasn't going to really die from cancer, there was no sense in killing myself with, all the other pleasures in life. And so I think I was relieved I could back down, go get some rest, and jump back into other goals in life. And I did. I dove into the construction industry. I continued to be a bartender, but I really got involved in the construction industry and started my first business and went back to college and did those kind of things that just seemed a little more sensible. And I'm really grateful for that. Again, that compass that allows me to move that direction and not spill onto, wow, this is so fun. I'll continue to push the edges. Not to say I didn't still have fun.
Right. Well, I'm really curious about, you said you dropped out of high school and left and went to India, but you said something like, because you felt like there was more in you or something to that effect. And I would love for you to unpack a little bit of what you were picking up on inside of yourself that told you there's something different for me than maybe the normal course, and allowed you to act upon it. Because one of my convictions as a person and a coach is that we're each born with some truth within us of who we are and what we're made to be. And that often when we're trying to discover what that is, we kind of go out there to try and find it, when in fact, the truth of who we are and what we're made to be really resides within us. And, I come from a Judeo-Christian background, and I would describe that I think that's something that God places within us. But no matter where you would identify the source of that truth, the more I work with people, the more I'm really convinced that when we, for whatever reason, ignore that voice within us or suppress it or try to push it to a side, it begins to cause all kinds of problems for us: psychological, mental, emotional, anger issues, because we are actively rebelling against the truth of our existence. So in short order, that's sort of a working philosophy that I've begun to see and develop. And I'm wondering, what were you picking up on as a young teenager that led you to say, this high school thing's not for me and India is, and you had this formative experience that gave you hookworms you thought was cool? I mean, so much changed for you in that moment. What allowed you to tune in to that voice within yourself, and what were you hearing?
Well, I love your philosophy. It resonates with me, and I think that we are born into this world. I think that our order of birth has a lot to do it as well. And I'm a second son and a middle child. And as an executive coach, somebody in leadership, I work a lot with teenagers as well. I always try to pinpoint where somebody was born in the order in their family, whether they're single kids or where they land, because I think it does color our worldview again. And for me, and this may come into that expectation point again, my older brother, who's a great guy, speaks 7 languages, plays pretty much any instrument, was a straight A student, was all-American athlete, drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals for baseball, could smoke a fat joint and study and ace everything, perfect scores, SATs, all that kind of stuff. Maybe not perfect, but I mean, a very brilliant guy. I struggled to even read a book. I don't think I read my first book. I got busted writing my book reports from the back of the back leaf of the books and just summarizing those things. It wasn't until I took my contractor's license test many, many years later, when I was in my 20s, that I realized that I was dyslexic. And so I failed pretty much every test I ever took. I had to study in the dark, with a light shining on my face to stay alert. And so I was a horrible student. I'm a decent musician. I was an average athlete. And there was a lot to live up to as a second son. You've got the shining star before you. But what I had was a ton of courage. And I was a courageous kid. And I was a good ambassador. I knew how to negotiate peace between family members. I had 2 younger sisters, so I was a good peacekeeper. I continue to do it. As a coach, it's what we know how to play the middle ground, not to be right, not to be wrong, but how to draw people to conclusions. So I think there's something about being a middle child that maybe allowed me to be that. So dropping out of school, all those things, I think were a product of not feeling like I was enough and knowing inside that I had the courage to go find out what enough would look like for me. And so when I left home at a young age and went as far away as I could to India, honestly, I didn't even know where India was. I just knew it was a long ways away, and I actually drove there overland. And so I went through countries like Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey, all these. It was called the hippie trail back then. I just knew I was looking for another version of myself. And I had the courage, I think, and stupidity, maybe, blind courage, to go looking for that. And I think I've managed okay.
I think that our stories and our purposes in life, our unique purposes, are inseparable. And what you've just shared about being a middle child and the expectation, or at least the comparisons that were available within your family with your older brother, and parts of your story, I would imagine at that time, that were somewhat unpleasant because of this comparison piece, and then learning about the dyslexia and the challenges you had in the standard classroom environment. It's just a great representation of how powerful our stories are in helping us understand our purpose. Now, in the moment, as the story is occurring, as you're in the middle of being the main character in your story, it's often difficult to pick up on the purpose in our story, how it's going to attach to our purpose. But so clearly for you, this, failing to find a fit in the standard academic environment, and just wanting more and having this comparison of an older brother who excelled in all of these socially valued ways, at least, not to say they aren't valuable, but he just sounded like he was sort of a golden child in many ways. This somewhat painful comparison maybe drove you out of the nest into a foreign land, overland, using that courage currency that you had, I guess, somewhat innately. I mean, do you feel like that's always been a part of your fabric, is this courageous, adventuresome spirit?
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt. There's Enneagrams, there's the MBTI, there's all these kind of personality models that are out there. I did one in a leadership course, I don't know, 20 years ago, and they typed me as a danger type. that we were doing ropes courses and falls, and you had to climb to the top of a totem pole, and you were tied on with a rope, and you were supposed to fall, and people had you on belay, and people were crying when they got to the top. And I asked for a blindfold and did a swan dive. I just,
That's awesome.
because I'm thinking these people aren't going to let me die. I paid good money for this. So,
right.
I think it can also be known as cocky.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to learn how to, I think, soften that over the years, is that I know that I've always had a lot of courage to go a little bit further than others and to test the waters and have big experiences and take a lot of risks. I've taken a lot of risks. I'm 65, dude, and so I'm still out there surfing in as big a surf as I can. So I'm often the oldest guy in the water too. So I'm not, I enjoy that. It gets my blood going, and I think I'm slowing it down a bit. Yeah, it's something I wanted to say that you had brought up. Oh, what I wanted to say is, when I realized about having a reading disorder, a learning disorder, whatever you want to call it, just being dyslexic, I'm a slow, slogging reader. It's awful how slow I read, but I love to read because I finally realized how to do it. But there was a little bit that I could let go, and letting go is really about death. It's about letting a part of yourself just die. I don't have to be that kid anymore. I'm no longer the one who isn't good enough. I'm no longer the little brother who didn't play or get or go. I was known as Little Kahn, so that I didn't know I had a first name for probably 10 years at least. It was Little Kahn. I had a bigger brother, and I loved it. It never bothered me. He taught me a lot of things, but I was always measured, no matter what, following in his footsteps. And when I finally realized that I was good enough, that my courage was the thing that was going to make me a better musician or a better athlete, a better person, and a builder. I mean, I became a builder, and I flunked algebra 3 times, never passed algebra. And I became a builder. I had to use geometry all the time. It was the practical application that made sense to me. And I finally let that part of myself die. And I think there's a little bit to tie into Andrew Petty is Dying, is that we're always having to make we're going to have to reckon with death in a lot of different ways. We're in the midst of a COVID crisis, and we have a lot of habits that and things that we were accustomed to doing, and they're dead for the moment. We've had to let go of those things. And that's another sense of being present to what am I going to do with what life I do have right now, versus just going ahead and burying what it was that I was doing, because I'm not doing that anymore. It's kind of dead. And I know you have those, and I have those, and everybody does. So that's the sense for me as being a young man with courage, letting go of the not good enough part of me that kind of maybe drove me too far to the edge. I have to prove that I'm this. Versus, no, that part of me can die. I'm totally good enough. I found the vein I could tap into, and that's, I think, why I truly enjoy helping young people. It's one of my greatest pleasures is high school age kids. I love high schoolers. It's that time where they're all confused, and they're just trying to figure out how do they fit in. And I often will say to every high schooler I know, nobody liked high school. It's the worst experience in life, practically, from the majority of people. Your life will begin once you start to get past that. So don't get hung up on high school. Kind of went off the rail a bit there.
No, you're exactly on the rails that I hope we could be on, because you've teased out a lot of meaning, especially in the expansion of the idea of dying. And there are many forms of death in life, not just the physical one where we leave this life and transition to something else. And I totally agree with your concept of, in order to become who you can be, parts of who maybe you thought you were going to be, or others thought you were going to be, or maybe even genuine aspirations that were part of what you wanted to be. Sometimes those things have to die in order for us to really step into who we are. And that dying is extremely painful. Maybe, I mean, the emotional, psychological pain that can come along with that, especially when we come from families that have very clear, non-negotiable expectations for what success as a human look like, and maybe success as a human in the Kahn family look like. You know, the Kahns are these kinds of people. We make this kind of money and it looks this kind of way. And I think there are many listening to this that can relate to that on some level. Well, all of us, 100% all of us can relate to that on some level. And sometimes those expectations are internally driven by us predominantly, but usually it's a mix of internal and external expectations that we begin to really hold on to and try to live into. And often they're very much off the beam of who we really are and what we're really meant to do in the world.
That's right. Expectations will bring disappointments, my friend. You know?
Yes. And I love that, because I haven't really wrestled with that kind of idea in my own life, because it makes me wonder, well, where's the motivation to do stuff? But I see more clearly now, as you tease that out, that there's still plenty of motivation to do stuff. You're just releasing the need for a certain result to occur.
Yeah.
You might look for and pursue a certain result, but you're not demanding it. And that gives you an openness, because as you travel that path toward that thing, then as new information comes your way, you have new experiences, you can always adjust, which keeps you open to growth and moving forward. I wanted to say quickly to our listeners, and most of the listeners are probably going to be of parent age, and maybe many of you have kids. You know, Rick's story is a great example of, fortunately he was able to find his way in more of the hands-on kinds of things really suited him, because the standard academic environment didn't. And maybe you're a parent right now. I've got two boys that are just like this. One is very tactical, practical, and concrete, and the other one, likes reading fantasy books and all that kind of stuff. They're really different kids. And for any parents out there that are struggling with trying to get their kids to toe the line in the standard classroom environment, and to be able to focus and this, that, and the other, I want to encourage you just to loosen your grip a little bit and step back and see that kid with fresh eyes and say, what does my kid really love? When they're doing this, they're really energized. It may not be what I would like or find interesting, but when is my kid really lit up? And by contrast, when is my kid really in the doldrums and not lit up? And to be willing to release your expectations of that kid and to kind of go with their flow. And that was something that you gave yourself permission to do, Rick, by checking out of high school early, going off on this amazing adventure into India. And then it led you into the construction world initially, where you had tremendous success and found a fit and, kind of found your people, I would imagine, because these people love doing it this way. I love creating this way. So I just want to encourage us to, especially us parents, to be mindful of where our kids are really coming from and who they really are, and not to think that everything that comes up that doesn't fit the mold is something that needs to be fixed, because it could be a clue to their very best offering, their very best gift, their most enjoyable life. And we may be treating it like a symptom that needs to be cured. As you you said you're 65 now. At 65, you look back on that episode as a 24-year-old. In what ways did that experience shape, especially from 24 to 54? Because 54, you've got this other part of your story we're going to touch on. But how did that experience at 24, what are one or two characteristics of the ways in which it impacted the way you chose to live from 24 to 54?
We talked about the courage I'd had as a kid, and I think that really played into so much. We had talked about our place in the family and kind of the death of that self-talk of not good enough. And so by the time I'd gone to India, and then I had this mixed diagnosis in San Francisco, I think my courage level was just ratcheted up. My self-confidence level of knowing that I knew what was best for me and how to live my life to the fullest, and living it wasn't going to be working for somebody else and grinding it out and being told what to do. I felt like I really had the green light and that compass inside to say, I know where north is and I'm going to push really hard to get there. And I started my own businesses, and I've always run my own businesses, and I've never been employed since. So, I've had 40 years of never having had a job, is what I like to proudly say, and that I'm probably unemployable. I don't know if I'd make a good employee. To really put it put a bow on it is that the experience of misdiagnosis, of looking at death and making choices and letting my life just unfold, knowing that I was going to play hard and go out my own way, it informed how I was just going to keep going. And I did by starting businesses, and I have no regrets. I could have lived up to expectations and gone into my father's business, which is what his hope was, which the good son, my older brother, did. And he retired very young, and they did quite well. None of those things were important to me. Independence, self-expression, and living my life the way I wanted to without any regrets has always been kind of the driving force. And I do think that was informed by brushing up against death, whether it was in India, and seeing how short life can be, how insignificant human life is treated in some parts of the world, and then my own first brush with it at 24. So I think it's definitely shaped a sense of independence and drive for me to make sure I'm having fun. I surf every day, and I try to pack it all in, man.
Have there been times when you realized that some of that initial motivation you got from that misdiagnosis and getting a new lease on life, have there been times when that's waned, or you've had to recapture it, or you found that maybe you've gotten stuck in someone else's expectations? Or how enduring has that motivation to really live your life been?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I think that's the trap of life, is the conformity. You talked about it, how we start to conform and live our life according to others' expectations. And our culture, the American culture, is definitely structured that way. So, of course, getting married, having a kid, having a job, providing, settling down, all those things felt like, well, I'll do that. My marriage fell apart when my daughter was a year and a half old, and I became a single parent. And so once again, I had a death of relationship and a death of ideals of how it was supposed to look. And I remember I was at a family gathering, and I was the worrywart single dad. My daughter was young, 3-4 years old, and I was just mothering her because I had this guilt that she didn't have a strong mother presence in her life, and that I was trying to be both mother and father, and this was it. And so any ideals I had about a perfect marriage were long gone. And at a family gathering, I have a cousin who is a pediatric oncologist, and so seeing plenty of challenges with children with cancer. And his partner was a family psychologist on staff, and I didn't know his partner. And he came over to me, and he said to me at a big brunch, must have been a bar mitzvah or something, I don't know what it was. He said to me, "Hey, dude, I got to tell you, you're the most up father I've ever seen." And I went, "What?" I mean, I'm a single dad. I've been grinding through being a builder and taking care of a baby and figuring it out. How dare you? And he said, "Stop trying to be a mother. Be the very best father you can be." And I went, wow. And that was a huge, another form of death. It let me release this guilt about mothering my daughter and figuring out, how do I braid hair or any of those things. And I just had permission to let that part of me, that expectation self, expire, die, and go right into just being the very best father I could be. And my daughter's fiance told me that he thanked me just a few days ago for one of the greatest lessons that I could have taught my daughter that has helped him as well, which was how to eat over the sink. And so I'm feeling pretty good about that. I used to cooked dinner with my daughter and said, forego the middleman of the table, kiddo. We'll just eat over the sink, and it's just so much easier. And he says they love cooking in the kitchen and eating over the sink, and that's being a good dad. So that was another form of death that came to me as a parent.
Man, kudos doesn't do it, but for becoming a single dad you said when she was like 1, right?
Yeah, 1.5. Yeah.
And what a powerful moment that must have been for you to have been able to relinquish some of the pressure you put on yourself to be mom and dad. And this question just of what in us needs to die in order for us to really live is just coming up again and again in your story. And, in this podcast, we've talked about death as the great motivator. We transition from this life to another, and this life really ends as far as we understand it. And that being a motivator to live our best lives now. But I love how we're beginning to add in this piece that you're bringing, which is there are sometimes necessary deaths within us in order to emerge into the life that we really are being called to live or have been given uniquely to live. And so that's a question I would pose, to myself, to our listeners, would simply be, what am I holding on to that actually needs to just go ahead and die a noble death, be put away? I mean, a simple example for me would be, I played soccer all the way through college. It was a huge part of who I was from an identity standpoint and all that kind of stuff. And, I think it was 3 years ago. I hadn't played full field 11-a-side in a long time, but I just was getting the itch, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just go out and play in the rec league. And I told my wife, maybe be really prudent. I'm just going to go out there and just have fun, pass the ball around, enjoy the game that I love so much. And it didn't take but one hard tackle from a 19-year-old Icelandic kid to flip that switch in me. And suddenly I was the 22-year-old mentally trying to perform that way physically on the field. And that lasted all of 2 more games when I pulled both my quads. So I was done. I mean, I was 45. My season was done.
Oh, wow.
I just remember beginning to reconsider my relationship with soccer and realize I'd just been holding on to that for a long time. My identity as an athlete was all around soccer. And again, this is a really simple illustration, but I just remember going, you know what? Maybe I can literally and figuratively hang up the cleats. It doesn't mean I don't go out and kick around. I don't still enjoy watching the game, but I don't need to pursue it the way I used to pursue it. What else could I do? And so I just allowed myself to begin thinking of myself as an athlete first, a soccer player second, but an athlete who could pursue whatever I might want to pursue, and picked up trail running. And I've been loving that this year, and finding a new athlete within myself. But I couldn't find that new athlete within myself and follow a new pursuit until I was able to let soccer die in the way that it had lived in my life for so long. And so that's a simple illustration, but I think many of us could probably think of things in our lives right now that it's time to let die. And that's not a bad thing. It's not the same as saying that you're quitting or giving up. It just needs to move on so that then you can move on and become more fully the person that you were made to be. So I really appreciate you pulling in that concept for us. Tell us about what happened at 54, because 30 years later, you had another brush with mortality. What happened?
Yeah, 2008, first off, happened, which everybody kind of remembers that as the previous marker for a meltdown globally, certainly. And about that time, I had the death of a business. As 2008, pretty much 2009, as the collapse happened, the Great Recession, my construction company evaporated after 20-some years. Heavily invested in residential development. It was the perfect storm for a lot of us. That's just another form of death. I love how you said the word holding on and letting go. And man, life is just a series of that. And the tighter we hold on to things, the more constricted we are, and the looser we are with the reins. You asked your listeners as parents just to lighten up on the reins a bit of expectation. And so I loved how you talked about holding on, letting go. And so letting go is death. And so I let go of a big part of my identity as a builder, and I moved to Mexico. A lot of it was as a economic refugee. Most of us who came down south here at that time will describe ourselves as that. There were people in technology business, all kinds of people that were business people that came down here and figured, I'm going to figure it out. but I don't need to be under that much financial pressure in the States. And I've seen so many of my friends reinvent themselves to great degrees of success over the last dozen years. And so that's a sense of dying, letting go of something. If you can let go, truly let go, something else is birthed through that. Around that same time, a couple of years later, down here, I became a very avid surfer at that time, and still am. And I was surfing, probably 2010, 2011, right around there. And over a series of a couple of days, I thought I had something in my eye. I thought maybe I detached my retina on a wipeout. Maybe I had a sty. I couldn't figure out what it was. And I'd ask friends, look in my eye, do you see anything? Finally, on the third day, I was out surfing and the curtain just came down on my left eye. It was like a stage curtain being pulled shut. That was it. Boom. I just watched it, all light kind of disappear. And I knew something was seriously wrong. And I told my surf mate, something's wrong. I think I need to go to the hospital. And so we paddled in, went to the hospital. And from that point, once you're in that, a lot of old muscle memory comes in, that back to those San Francisco days of, all right, doctors are going to, a diagnosis really just means their very best guess. That's really all a diagnosis is. They're taking with as much data as they can gather, and then they take a really good guess at what you got. And their best guess after an MRI of my head, the neurologist told me that I had MS and that it was fast moving and that I should get my life in order. Of course, I listened to him and I walked out to my car, and I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we both cried for a good 10 minutes. The stress level had been pretty high leading up to that. And there was a sense of relief as well amongst us that, okay, well, it is a bit of a death sentence, and you know that. And so I figured I knew how it was going to unfold, and it was a little bit like colon cancer. Well, where am I going to find a way to live my new version of sex, drugs, and rock and roll? But at 54, that wasn't in my repertoire anymore. I wasn't going to play that hard.
When they said it was fast acting, had they given you a timeline? Like, you can expect to have 2 more years of reasonable quality of life, then beyond that, we don't know? Or what was the timeline you had?
They just said, get my life in order. And I've had 2 friends that have passed away from MS. So much like my worldview of my grandfather having had colon cancer, I had some benchmark for what MS might look like. One was very fast, and the other one was an old girlfriend of mine, and was very, very slow and painful for sure. So either way, I just felt like I had the gift of knowing that, if you know the finite time, you can plan around it. It's not like getting hit by a bus. Yeah, that's over quick. That might be a good way to go. I don't know. At any rate, I let all that process run through my mind, really only on the drive home, which was about a 40-minute drive. Let myself kind of settle in with the reality of that. And then I immediately got home and called a friend of mine, Boulder Community Hospital, who was the head of radiology up there. And I told him I had an MRI and that I'd been diagnosed with MS. And he said, hop on a plane, bring your imaging with you, and let me take a look at it. And I did, flew up, stayed at his house. He got home from work the next morning. He'd been on call all night and came in, and in his bathrobe, read my images against his kitchen window, put them up against the morning light. And he said, I've given bad news so many times I can't tell you, but you do not have MS. You most likely moved a hair in your MRI, and it created what are known as artifacts, which are lesions that look like lesions in the brain, which would mimic some of the symptoms of MS, and losing your eyesight is one of those things as well. And so all this old memory of mimicry, of lesions, of almost the same script of when I was 24 came to mind. And I realized, I don't have MS, but what the heck do I have? I'm blind in my left eye. And that took me on quite a path and quite a journey to discover what it is that caused my blindness. I had a stroke of the optic nerve, and just think of fiber optics, and they're the optic nerves receive the light that are around us, which translate light information into information to our brain. So it's the fiber optics working area, and mine there was a blood clot and they were obliterated. So I have a couple of threads left. That's in essence the short version of what happened. I'm blind in my left eye. I cannot see in my left eye, and which has been a significant adjustment to living.
And it's just remarkable that, I've known you for 4 years now, and we've had plenty of conversations, some of them on the deeper side. And I had no idea you were blind in your left eye. I had no idea that you had this optic nerve stroke. Had no idea, of course, of your earlier episode at 24. And it's really interesting to me that I don't know that. But it's very clear that part of the reason I don't know that is because it's not something that you lead with about yourself. It's not defining who you are. It's part of your story. And it certainly has influenced and impacted the way that you've lived. But you've integrated it, I think, into your story rather than it being these things on your timeline, these big blips that, that somehow you want people to know about. I don't know what I'm trying to say other than it's really remarkable to me that I didn't know these things yet. And in fact, you've told me in previous conversations prior to this episode that it's not common knowledge. And our colleagues that we do this leadership development work with, there may be a few you've shared that with, but I think you said even those folks that we work closely with aren't aware of this information. So that really is remarkable to me because statistically speaking, what are the odds that someone at 24 and then at 54 would get first really critical diagnoses, terminal diagnoses, and that those would be reversed? That's just statistically speaking, like getting hit by lightning twice. And, separated by 30 years is remarkable. And you've told me that this initial misdiagnosis of MS has led to another diagnosis of something that is still significant. You have lost your left eye permanently, but there's another ongoing part of that condition, right, that has some complications.
Yeah, I have polycythemia vera. So for any listeners out there that have this, they'll relate. Phyllis George, who just passed away, she was a really famous broadcaster from the 60s, and she did the Olympics, and she really kind of broke the glass ceiling for women. She's a former Miss America. And so I remember as a kid seeing her on Wide World of Sports and things like that. And she was the first woman sportscaster. She just passed away a couple of months ago from polycythemia vera. She'd had it for 30 years. And so it's a progressive cancer. It's in the cancer category because it starts in my bone marrow. And so I have a mutated gene in my bone marrow that I overproduce red blood cells. It makes me a clotter. So I am just a propensity towards blood clots, and it's treatable and it is progressive. So, it's one of those things that I'll either die from or I'm going to die with. It's a little bit like prostate cancer for men as well. You're going to die from it or you're going to die with it. Maybe they're both, both things that if you could choose not to have them, you would choose not to. So I do take blood thinners, and every 8 weeks I have to go in for phlebotomies. If it was in the old days, I'd get leeches and just leach blood off of me. I think a big piece, I'm very grateful because I have had to go into some of the clinics in San Francisco, Kaiser, for example, into the hematology department for treatments. And people in there do have cancer and they are in there for chemo treatment. And I'm popping in and getting blood taken off and walking out with an orange juice and going home for a nap. And it's a big difference. And it's not lost on me that I could have been one of those folks. And my father was. He died of leukemia. And what I have is a precursor down the road, precursor to leukemia. And does that mean I'm going to get leukemia? I don't know, dude. I don't it's not an expectation that I hold on to. Would it does just indicate to me once again is life's about the death of my eye, the death of mountain bike riding. I can no longer single track. I lived in Boulder. You don't live in Boulder and not be a climber, a mountain bike rider, a yogi, and a health expert of some kind. That's the graduation from living in Boulder. But I can't ride a mountain bike anymore. Single track's gone. Don't have the perspective. Hiking, I used to be the guy that blazed and just blew everybody away. Going downhill, I have to go a little more gingerly. The ground bounces in a different way now because I don't have the perspective. Surfing, once in a while, I will drop in on somebody. I don't mean to. And if there's any surfers listening, they'll go, oh man, what a d-. But you don't mean to drop in. It's a no-no. But there's only so many times I can look over my shoulder before I make the move. And it's on my blind side. It's an apology is usually followed.
What are you aware of in terms of how this second encounter with mortality has shaped the 10 plus years since then? Adding that to your first one at 24 and the kind of decisions that you're making and the kinds of things that you value and prioritize. What kind of awareness do you have about how it's influenced you?
What brings to mind is that I used to have a lot of hope around my eyesight coming back because it took almost 2 years to diagnose what I had. So many a doctor, a naturopath, and witch doctor would try potions and lotions and medicines and treatments on me, and all telling me, we will bring your eye back. Your eyesight will come back. And it caused a lot of more upset in my life than anything else. We talked a little bit about hope and fear. And I would wake up pretty much every morning and open my left eye with the hope I could see again. And I would get really depressed and in a funk to start my day that I was still blind. And it was something that went on for quite a while as I'd roll over in the morning and my first thing in my mind was, did my eyesight come back? And when I finally got the real diagnosis that it's never coming back, there's a chance that if it happened, it could happen in the other eye. It's a 15% chance. That's what they told me. I love all those percentages. Like, who makes that stuff up? But so I say, well, there's an 85% chance it's not going to happen. I also do know that, Andrew, that macular degeneration, so some of your listeners may be familiar with that, runs in my family. My grandmother, my great aunt, my mother, they're all blind. Some are dead. My mother's still alive, but she's pretty much blind. And so I've got a pretty good chance I'm going to be blind because I've only got one good eye to play with. So if I get hit with Mac in my right eye, I jokingly tell people that in 10 years, I'm going to Portland and I'm going to the premier place for seeing eye dogs, and I'm getting myself a seeing eye dog. That's my next pet.
Nice.
And I'll be that guy, but I'm going to still be ready to go through life with, another death, man. It's just all it will be. It's not going to stop me. As I play music, and as any musician will probably, our teacher, of course, will tell you, they'll say, stop looking at your hands. I don't care whether it's piano or guitar or whatever it might be. And because essentially you're supposed to play by feel, you're supposed to play blind, you're supposed to trust yourself. And so I think that there's a piece about knowing or maybe believing I'm going to be completely blind one day, one gone, and chances are the other one's waiting for it, that I try my best to kind of play with what that's going to look like when that goes too. And it's not going to be the end of the world.
What was different this time? Because you said that in this occasion, you worked for 2 years to figure out if there was a remedy, and that you would wake up and open your left eye and hope that this time maybe it's working miraculously, and you'd be depressed and in a funk about it. And that seems different than your earlier in life approach to living life with no expectations. And in this case, the eyesight went away, and it sounds like there was some hope attached there. And when the hope wasn't realized, you really had some dark moments, no pun intended. But what do you think was different in this? Sorry. What do you think was different at 54 that created these expectations and then these plummets in your mental and emotional state when the expectations weren't met?
It might be my faith in medicine. I was older, so I'd been around medicine and doctors more. At 24, I think I was invincible, and I didn't think anybody that was over 30 knew anything about what they were talking about anyhow. So why listen to them? And at 54, I was more putting myself in the hands of experts rather than being my own advocate and expert as a 24-year-old. So I think youth is an amazing thing that we, for better or worse, we're invincible when we're young. And the older we get, we tend to look for somebody to tell us the answers. And when doctors were trying to lead me on to the hope of my eyesight coming back, what it really did was promote fear. The fear that it's not coming back, that waking up every morning. And I think we talked about it before. I'd done a workshop with a teacher from Naropa University who had a class called No Hope, No Fear. And that was a big game changer for me as well, as to make a strong relationship with letting go of hope and seeing how I was no longer afraid. If I didn't wait and hope, or the relationship to expectation is the same, expect my eyesight to come back. If I could just let go of that and simply say, I'm blind. If it comes back, bonus round. If it doesn't, move on, dude. You still got one left. And that was a game changer, was to let go of the hope. And I think modern medicine, Western medicine, preys on tremendous amount of hope. I'm not saying hope's a bad thing, but I think it can be a dangerous prescription as well. I think it takes people away from the reality of, in your words, letting go. And if somebody gave you hope that you could continue to play soccer, come on, Andrew, work a little harder, do some training, have a surgery or 4, and you'll be back out there. And you continue to do that and weren't able to accomplish playing soccer again, you would be really disappointed. Instead, you took it on the chin and say, I'm an older guy, game over, I'm going to run and do something else. So in your words, letting go, it's another death. It's just a form of that.
You said something to me that I can't exactly recall the way you said it, but it really struck me in our preliminary conversation before we recorded this episode. And it was around, because I talk often about how important our relationship with death is, and really coming to terms with what it is and then upgrading it wherever we find it to be lacking, especially when we find that we're living in great fear of death or avoidance of death, or trying to live so that we won't die, or our life is focused on not dying, which is, in my opinion, not the same thing as living. And you said something like, our relationship with death is really about our relationship with life, isn't it? Do you recall that statement?
Yeah, those fleeting moments of wisdom, man, they're crazy. But yeah, I mean, it's not so much about death. It's how do I want to live my life? It's about our relationship to living. This is my philosophy, and those closest to me share those philosophies. The reason I'm on this podcast with you is I so was intrigued by how you are, what your focus is and your passion is around dying. Because I think it's an important thing to embrace death on all levels: relationships, the physical, the emotional, the financial, name it. Death is waiting around every corner. And so what? What is your life about? And what was I really made to accomplish for me, not for others who have expectations? I don't have to do what you think I should do. What do I think I need to do? Where's my passion? And I think that knowing that death is part of life, in whatever form that death shows up, it has helped me. Not only do I make better decisions on how I want to live my life, which is I want to engage in the natural world all the time. I want to be out in nature. I want to surf. I want to hike. I want to be engaged. I'm going to do it until I can't do it. I'm not going to be a couch potato. I want to help other people, and I want to help them find out what it is that turns them on the most. And the things that are holding them back, let them die. Let those things go. is that serving you any longer? And if it's not, if you've got a goal that isn't in line with your passion, if that goal's for somebody else to meet their expectation, then you're never going to be satisfied. And so death is about letting go of all of those things and focusing, for me, on what brings me the greatest light in my life, and forever, however long it could be. Seriously, Andrew, we don't know. We have no idea whether it's. I just took care of two birds. They're green herons. The first one died the first night I had it. I thought, I'm a horrible foster parent to these birds. I just died. The second one I just released yesterday into an estuary here. I felt horrible that he was still caged up. People were telling me, no, you need to trial flight him in your house. You need to do this, you need to do that. And I looked at this bird and said, dude, I think you're ready. And I took him out to a beautiful area near here in a river and an estuary, shallow water. And when he got near the water, he could hardly wait to get out of the cage. Plopped him in. He immediately ate and took off. Never looked over his shoulder. I was dead to that bird. And he moved on.
I'm glad you told me about those. I'm glad you got 50% survival rate out of that. Those must have been cute little fellas. The multiple deaths that you're talking about throughout life reminds me of, what a snake goes through when it sheds its skin, because that skin shedding process is not, from what I understand, an easy one. It's maybe over the course of days, and the snake has to sort of slither over rough ground to get that skin to come off. But once it does, it emerges with, new skin, and it's a bigger snake, and it's a more powerful snake and able to do more and go farther. And that's a natural part of its life cycle. But imagine if a snake was afraid of the fact that it was losing its skin and tried to hold on to its skin, it literally couldn't become the animal that it was meant to be. And I think some of us come to these moments in life where there is a shedding of our old skin that's needed, and we try to hold on to it desperately in ways that end up really hurting us, because the way to grow was actually to shed that skin and to move on from that thing. And I appreciate the way you're painting that picture for us of life being a series of deaths, and that's good and necessary, not something to be afraid of or to try to avoid. That growth in life is actually a series of necessary deaths. That's powerful. I like that. Let's land the plane for the sake of time. I could keep talking to you forever. I think you're a super interesting guy. The ease with which you interact with people, the genuine interest that you bring to people. We haven't talked any really about your most recent chapter professionally, which has been more in the just in the world of developing people in many different shapes and forms, brought about by 2008 when the Great Recession happened. And I would imagine that your experience with the loss of the vision further helped you to double down on what mattered most, that being, in your opinion, people and their well-being and their development. We haven't even talked about that chapter in your life yet, but you're just a genuinely easygoing, warm, interested person who, ever since I came on doing the leadership development stuff on the team that we serve on together, you've always taken a genuine interest in me, and I've always really felt that and known that. And I mention all these simply to say to our listeners the quality of person that you are, and that everything you're saying right now, you absolutely believe and you live it out. You've chosen to live in Mexico because that, most of the time, because that really fits into your philosophy of life, which is one about enjoying things and being with people and creating relationships and really listening to your inner voice. So the final question I want to ask you is one that I ask most of my podcast episode guests, and that is, what do you hope we can learn from your story? If you could perfectly bottle or package some lesson, some concept, some application, what would it be based upon your story and your experience in life so far?
Yeah, I've pondered this question a bit. And Andrew, I think it always comes down to presence. Just try our best to be in this moment, not to hold on to the past. Our past definitely shapes our present. We've talked about worldview and our experiences, and they wire us in ways. They help protect us, and sometimes they can get us in the way. And then quite often we try to project too far in the future. That's hope or expectation. And we try to think, yeah, okay, and when. And the truth is that I do my very best to stay in this moment. What is today going to mean? Doesn't mean I don't plan. Of course I do. But, John Lennon said, life is what happens when you're busy making plans. Be in life now and live it fully, whether it's parenting or whether it's sailing, whether it's loving somebody, or whether it's really having to leave somebody, whatever it might be. Life is going to have its things that you can rejoice with, and it's temporary, and it's going to have its painful moments, and they're temporary as well. So both our celebrations and our failures, they both have a finite time, which means they die. We're not always successful, and we're not always failing. And so if you can just be with that and not, as you've said many times, hold on to or grasp on and get that chokehold on life. Oh my God, I've got the tiger by the tail. It's going to turn around and bite you suddenly, eventually. So don't hold on to the tail so tight. And that's, I think, what I would say to people is don't hold on so tight. It's going to come and go, and enjoy the ride and accept it when it happens and let it go.
That's awesome. And the snake metaphor comes back here too, because of course, if you grab a poisonous snake by the tail, it's going to find its way back to you. And I just love that idea of holding on too tightly to life. It's going to turn around and bite you. And I think it's almost proportional, isn't it? That the chokehold that we have on life, the stronger that chokehold, the more desperate that chokehold, the worse the bite's going to be once it gets you. What would you say to someone who says, okay, Rick, I'll buy into that I need to let go a little bit, that I need to, that would even be a better way to live, but I don't know how to. What's a first step for someone who's really feels stuck? They want what you're talking about. They see what you're talking about. They can envision that being a better way, but they genuinely feel stuck. What would just a first step be?
I'd say slow down. Most people are just in too much of a hurry to fix things versus just to accept things and recognize. So I think, of course, meditation's a great tool, but I think people just need to slow down. If there's one thing I'm hoping comes out of the world crisis that we're in now, both with racial injustice and with the pandemic, is that people slow down enough to examine their belief systems a little bit. And what's true about that for me? And is this still serving me? Don't be too hard on yourself, but you got to slow down enough to ask yourself, what is important to me? This is it. We've had the opportunity to slow down, to pump the brakes. I would say start there. Slow down, sit down, be quiet, get some quiet time, walk in nature if you have to. But don't be so busy solving life's problems. It doesn't work that way. It's best sometimes just to be quiet, and the path will reveal itself, and you just have to make good choices.
So part of what I hear in that then is simply creating the space for yourself to see and think and hear differently, but that in our frenetic pace of life, often we're not even creating the space for there to be an opportunity to see or think or hear differently. And so slowing down at least provides you some of that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, I've got a lot of coaching clients these days, and one of the common themes that I see with some of the younger clients that I'm working with, who I really admire a lot, is that they're so driven for this certain marker that they've got to hit. They talk in terms of who's a billionaire, and it's just a funny bar that is unachievable. Is that going to make you happy when you get there? That's it? And it's the Mexican fisherman story, and I won't tell you the whole story, but it's a famous story, and it's one that I think would help people to read, the Mexican fisherman story. If you think that getting achievements and getting there is the answer, it generally isn't. And again, that's part of letting go of that expectation that you have to follow your passion and check in. check in and make sure that it's in line with your values, in line with your family's values, the people that are close to you. And I think if you follow that compass, we all have it. We all have an internal compass, and sometimes we just forget to pay attention to it. We fall prey, I know I have, we fall prey to what we think other people want us to do. You're really courageous, Andrew, in what you're doing. You're self-employed. You don't have to be. You could be working for somebody else. You could have a job. You've had them before. You've chosen a path to really express who Andrew is. What is it that makes up Andrew? And that's why I am really honored to be on this show, because I think the topic is relevant, it's powerful, and you're courageous enough to step in there and see if you can make a difference with this. Is it going to make you rich? I don't know. I don't think that's what you're motivated by. But will it, if you do this well, I know that it will take you to the next thing of doing that extremely well. And the better that you are at being you, the more the world eats that up. And if that means that they give you money to eat that at your table, more power to you, man. But I think the motivation that you show and just giving your gift to the world and what you believe, that again is what I would tell people. Do what's driving inside, that gnawing, what is it that I've got to give to this world? Don't pay attention to what people want you to give. Give what you've got.
I love all that. I love all that, Rick. I wanted to just quickly say that, the COVID thing and the racial injustice that we're experiencing these days, neither of those are actually all that new. They're just new maybe in the scale and scope of the current experience. Viruses have been in the world forever, and unfortunately, racial injustice has as well. They're creating a level of disorientation and unsettledness, I think, across the globe that many of us haven't experienced before, regardless of your perspective on, like how lethal the virus is or not, or the government's response or not. There's none of us that aren't affected in some way through minor inconvenience to major catastrophic kinds of things by what's happening. And for those of you who find yourself really perplexed and stuck as a result of this current wave of unsettledness in the world, I want to encourage you to stop and say, in what ways am I being given a moment in time to examine who I am, what I'm doing in the world, how well it aligns with my understanding of how I'm made, and is there a way that this experience is kicking me out of a nest that I needed to get kicked out of? And into a new chapter of my life. I think if my very naive understanding of eagles works here at all, at some point the eagle's mom or dad looks at the little eaglet and goes, you're ready. And the eagle has never flown before. And the eagle's kicked out of the nest. And most of them make it. They figure out between, the limb and the ground, these things on my side are meant to make me fly, and I'm going to start doing something with them. And most of them make it. And the parent makes the call about when that time is for them to experience the fact that they can fly on their own. And I think the universe is giving many of us a moment like that right now, where the old ways aren't any longer available to us. And we're discovering what's really inside of us. And I want to encourage all of us to, whatever we're seeing, be willing to look at it with courage, with honesty, and to take action on that thing. Because I think out of this can emerge some of the best chapters for mankind, for all of humanity, in terms of what each of us is bringing to the table. It's causing us to look at ourselves, causing us to look at what we can do in the world. So I think it's a moment. I would stop short of calling this an opportunity, because I think there's enough suffering around all of this that it would be immature to call this an opportunity. But it is nevertheless creating a moment for some of us, many of us, to say, what nest do I need to get kicked out of? Or to use your earlier example, what needs to die so that I can live moving forward? Some big questions being asked in all of our lives right now. Rick, let's wrap this up. Thanks so much for being here. And I want to just personally thank you for your investment in me over the past 4 years, doing the work that we've done together, investing in the lives of construction leaders specifically together. You and I get a first row glimpse into lives being transformed as they understand themselves more deeply and then deploy themselves more powerfully in the world as a result. And your investment in me in that time has been significant in helping me to understand myself, helping me to be encouraged. This podcast exists in part because of your encouragement, because you just saw that I had something I wanted to do and something I believed in, and you kept believing in me. And so I just want to thank you publicly for your belief in me, and what you've done with me just as a colleague and a friend is something that you do with everyone that you interact with on the personal and professional side. You're a wonderful addition in the world. I'm glad you passed through 2 encounters with mortality, and you're still ticking above ground and breathing. You've got a lot more to offer. Thanks for being here with me today, Rick.
Andrew, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. A lot of mutual admiration. Thanks, Andrew, for having me and listening to my story.
If you enjoyed today's conversation with Rick, share it with one other person who you think needs to hear what Rick had to say too. That one simple step, just a click of your mouse, will help change the world by creating a movement of people committed to becoming the people they were made to be and living the lives they were made to live. That's what we're up to here on Andrew Petty is Dying. And here's a special opportunity, limited to just 6 listeners. On Wednesday, August 19th, 2020, from 4:30 to 6 p.m. Mountain Time, I'll host an exclusive guest close-up video call with Rick. If this episode left you wanting more from Rick, then this is the best place to get it. The first 6 people to throw their hats in the ring will get to join the call. Email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com or connect with me on Facebook at Andrew Petty Coach. My purpose as a coach is to help you deploy your unique purpose in the world. Connect with me on Facebook at Andrew Petty Coach or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com. I'll help you create the life you know you were made to live. To learn more about Graveyard Group Masterminds, where you tap into the power of your mortality, to become the person you were made to be and live the life you were made to live, visit digdeepwinbig.com/The Graveyard Group. I'm so glad you tuned in today. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Andrew Petty is Dying.